Hi everyone, Happy New Year. I'm just going to warn you that this is not going to be your sexiest podcast episode. um this episode, if you're watching, I present the charts. It's not edited. It's literally live. I have very little to no notes, dates. I really just wanted to provide a general overview of 2026. If you're looking for a more detailed overview of 2026, check out my 2026 year ahead horoscopes. You basically have your own rising sign portal. So for example, if you're a Libra rising, you're going to have your own Libra rising portal. Every month is its own section where each month has your own presentation, going through the transits visually in a simple but stimulating way. And then there is so many additional supplemental material that I've sort of vetted. Some of it's my own, some of it's other astrologers, that can really support those transits and understanding what is going on with more depth if you're interested in information and learning and all of that. I also add a little bit of the human design element of it, how you can really tune into your inner authority, to know what really resonates, what doesn't, to kind of guide you through. And it's really, you get over 2 hours of material just for your rising sign, just for the presentations. And then the additional supplemental material is, endless hours. And I think I go over 60 plus transits for the year. So in this general overview, I only want to discuss what I think are the major trigger points throughout 2026 that are connected. So there's sort of these interesting points throughout 2026 that I want to talk about. In addition to, my monthlies, or if you've purchased the portal, or you want to purchase the 2026 year ahead portal that has so hours and hours and hours of information, that gives such a more detailed view month by month, that this is more of a wide perspective, how are all of these things connected? How can we we zoom in on these transits, but how can we zoom out and gain a wider perspective on what actually is transpiring? In some ways it can help. It can help when we kind of pull out and we see the bird's eye view. So, this is a general overview. It is not conclusive. I want to warn you, it's live. All of my stuff is pretty much live, but this is very, very live. I'm in the midst of holiday season. So a lot of this is just, we're going live. I did blank out the transit on the left side on my software just to prevent confusion if you're watching, so that the dates and the transit on the right, if you're watching, are the transits that I'm actually pulling up. So I just wanted to verify that. I didn't edit it out when I pull up the human design components that I go to in the general overview. So don't let that overwhelm you. But it's a pretty raw, not so edited approach, but I wanted to get this out there for you guys to provide the broad perspective as we go through the monthly horoscopes, where things get more detailed. And certainly if you purchase my 2026 year ahead portal year ahead horoscope, there is 60 plus transits presented to you that go through, plus some supplemental material that I might add more to throughout the year if I feel inspired or I feel very aligned to it. So definitely check that out. The link to purchase that year ahead portal, where it's not a guide, it's not a downloadable guide, it's literally like an online course for your 2026 year ahead horoscope. So there's a lot in there. So definitely check that out. The link is in the description below if you haven't checked that out already. Anyways, again, this is general. I'm not going over every transit. I'm not going over every eclipse. I'm just going over, I think, the major points of 2026 to really pay attention to as we move through the more detailed transits in the monthly horoscopes, etc. So anyways, let's jump in. Hello, Virgo risings. Okay, so getting into 2026, I really want to talk about the situation piling up in your Capricorn 5th house of joy, creativity, self-expression, children, if applicable to you, romance. So here's the thing. A lot of you could feel this the days leading up to the 16th, 17th, January 16th or 17th. So definitely pay attention to sort of the days, maybe depending on your level of sensitivity, ability to feel these things, like a week up to this. So some of you could be feeling this before the second half of January. So one thing I want to point out is you're going to have the moon applying to a new moon in your Capricorn 5th house, Mercury, Mars, and Venus all in Capricorn. So yeah, this is a heavy pileup, especially with personal planets and a new moon initiating a new opportunity, a new beginning. Generally speaking, in this 5th house of joy, creativity, self-expression, children, etc. So what I really want to get to, because this podcast episode is really, I'm trying to keep a bird's eye view here. Yes, this is a lot going on in your Capricorn 5th. However, what I want to point out is these personal planets, Mercury, Mars, Venus, they're all around this time forming a closing sextile to Saturn in your Pisces 7th house of personal and professional partnerships, including marriage, or really any long-term partnership, whether it's personal or professional. So the closing sextile is sort of the closer to the story, in my opinion. So these planets originally went conjunct Saturn and then went all the way around your chart and are now sort of closing out. So if you're watching, it's closing out the story where eventually it will rejoin Saturn, not in Pisces this time. It will rejoin Saturn in your Aries 8th house of transformational work, long-term financial situation, so investments, assets, debt, loans, partners' resources, if applicable. And we'll get to that in April, where a lot is initiating here. So mid to late January, I actually think that things are starting to close out with what has transpired over the past couple years. That could have impacted, for some of you, could have really impacted your personal and professional partnerships. But the closing sextile is really an opportunity to take, to close out the story, to maybe even prepare for a new cycle coming in April. In addition to this new moon in your 5th house. So what's an opportunity to kind of start closing out what has transpired the past couple years, especially with Mars, which I'll get to in a moment. But where can you also set new intentions, new ideas, new opportunities that can really start to cultivate more joy in your lives with this new moon in the 5th house of joy? So that's sort of a bird's eye view, but I want to pinpoint Mars in particular. One, for time purposes. I can't do all the cycles here with the personal planets, but Mars in particular, because it is exalted in your Capricorn 5th house. And it also rules this Aries 8th house where a lot is initiating in April, which is why I think this could be potentially connected to what transpires and really initiates in April. So Mars is not only forming a closing sextile to Saturn, but it had its last conjunction with Saturn in your Pisces 7th house of personal and professional partnerships back around April of 2024. So some of you might be able to think back to roughly around April of 2024, what themes or specific things were really coming up around this time that could have been playing out in partnerships, but also could have affected communication, exchanging information, as well as, what brings you joy, children, if applicable to you, as well as any major health or work situations. So a lot of you could have seen a lot of communication, even some family stuff, children, if applicable to you, or sort of a health situation maybe playing out in your individual lives, but also maybe playing a part within your personal or professional partnerships. Even if that doesn't resonate, a lot of you can just think back to the first couple months of 2024, what was kind of closing out, what was being initiated, that's really played out the past couple years, that now is closing. Mars is also applying to a closing trine with Uranus in your Taurus 9th house of growth and potential, which could be career related for some of you. So this is also creating a pretty stimulating, in my opinion, with an exalted Mars and Uranus being quite stimulating in and of itself, a stimulating flow of energy to sort of close out some things, but also maybe be inspired to create more flow around the growth and potential you really want to focus on. Again, that could be career related, that has had a lot of instability for some of you in the previous years. So some of you might be seeing sort of opportunity or the ability to dissolve obstacles to areas that have been challenged. And for some of you, it might be the area of partnership, or it could be the area of growth and potential, which could be career related. So again, this is a very interesting time where I think January kicks off this really weird closing of cycles, but also like planting seeds and initiating new chapters. And for you, Virgo, it's really sort of like what brings you joy, what's really going to support your physical body, what opportunities are there to also support your health and your work, especially with Uranus eventually making its final ingress in a couple months into your Gemini 10th house of career, public recognition, where a lot can start to unfold in this area. Before I get to April, where I think a lot is going to initiate in this Aries 8th house, I want to talk about February 17th, when there is this new moon solar eclipse at 28 degrees in your 6th house of health and or work routines. This is just, in my opinion, a very, very important eclipse for all of us, because this is not only a new moon eclipse where, eclipses tend to pack a little bit more energy, but this eclipse is ruled by Saturn. And Saturn is 3 days away from an exact, by the minute, conjunction with Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries, which is a critical degree. This is a very rare conjunction. Saturn and Neptune have formed a conjunction in Aries before many, many, many years ago, I believe in the 1860s. But it has I don't think it's ever been at 0 degrees of Aries, which is that critical cardinal degree. And to have this very rare conjunction happen with an eclipse ruled by Saturn, I think is very, very significant. So, new moon solar eclipse in your 6th house, new opportunities, new lifestyles, new ways of focusing on your vitality, on focusing on your health, your work, your routines. that could be playing a part in maybe surrendering or dissolving things that no longer serve your health or no longer serve your work, or both. That might sort of kick off and initiate transformational work that could be playing a part in this, or looking at sort of your financial situation in order to support it. Either way, this is a really important solar eclipse, just with the rare combinations that are going on here. This new moon solar eclipse is also square Uranus, so it has, I think, the ability to create a lot of action and tangible change to your health or work through growth and potential themes. So some of you might be wanting to learn more, wanting to increase and innovate your growth and potential to support your health or a work situation. So I think this is just a very, very interesting eclipse here that I really wanted to just emphasize before we get to April. So now let's get to April, around mid-April, but I want to start around April 10th, 11th, 12th, when Mars enters its home. Mars is home here in Aries, in your 8th house of transformational work or those financial themes, resources, investments, assets, debt, loans, etc. And Mars is going to start or apply or start to be conjunct Neptune here. Again, back in January when I mentioned Mars is going to be creating new cycles, new stories that are going to play out over the next 2.5 years. Now, what I want to point out about this is the last time Mars created new cycles with Neptune and Saturn, it was in your Pisces 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. Now it's starting new cycles regarding mutual empowerment. How do you create mutual empowerment in your connections or within your partnership, whether it's personal or professional? It's going to also be new cycles regarding the financial themes, the investments, the assets, the debt, the loans, as well as any transformational work that might be playing into a plan of action that, again, could be health and or work related for some of you. Either way, Mars is creating a new cycle with Neptune as we get into April. And shortly after that, Mars starts to apply to Saturn in your Aries 8th house of, again, transformational work, long-term financial themes, resources. And now it's creating a new 2.5 year cycle with Saturn. Same thing with Neptune. The last time these two joined, it was in your Pisces 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. So there could have been ongoing themes playing out within your connections with others, the type of connections you do want to make, etc. Now it's happening in the area of finances, long-term finances, transformational work. And this time, Mars is in rulership. Mars is home. And what I want to point out is that we have Neptune, Mercury, Saturn, Chiron, this new moon, so the sun and the moon, all in Aries, reporting to Mars. So Mars owns this house and they're all guests. So just like if you owned a home and you had all these guests in your home, it's your rules, it's your house, it's your way. So this time compared to the previous years, Mars comes in and it's like, listen up. This is the plan of action. This is the desire. This is the motivation. And I think that Mars is going to sort of assert itself here because Mars is in charge of all of these planets. And the new cycle with Saturn could be sort of a new 2.5 year cycle around core motivations and desires, not only regarding maybe financial themes or transformational work, but some of you could really start to initiate situations playing out with your health or your work, as well as, what brings you joy, what really is going to fulfill your joy, your creativity, your self-expression. And Saturn is there ruling the area of joy, health, and work, but it is in fall. So it's basically in a foreign country and it doesn't speak the language, whereas Mars is home. So the way I look at it is you might be navigating like new ways of joy. You might be navigating new ways of health or new ideas for work or routines or situations with your children, if applicable, where Mars has a lot more say in the situation. And at the same time, we have this new moon at 27 degrees of Aries, technically conjunct Chiron at 26 degrees of Aries. And if you've been following me for a while, I don't talk about every new moon or full moon. But the reason why I'm mentioning this new moon with Chiron is because I think it is directly connected to the new cycles that Mars is creating with Neptune and Saturn, especially in its place of rulership. So whatever new cycles are going on here with what I just discussed, the new moon comes along and says, okay, generally speaking, let's create a new opportunity. Let's create a new, new way of being here. However, it's conjunct Chiron. So I think some of us are going to like this and some of us are going to hate this. And I think it's a matter of, what old patterns and old wounds even are really not going to support this new cycle. What old patterns don't support the work that you want to do? What old patterns don't support the health that you want to feel and the vitality that you want to feel, especially with Pluto going through that 6th house of health? And what old patterns don't really support the joy that you want to feel? And when I peeled back the human design on this, so the human design on the new moon conjunct Chiron on April 17th, we have, so please don't let this overwhelm you if this is totally new to you. So April 17th, we have, again, the sun and moon are in conjunction. So the sun is at gate 3. The moon is also at gate 3. And theoretically, Chiron is also at gate 3. So gate 3 is a lot of things, but I think collectively, some of us might be feeling this more individually depending on our human design, but I think collectively gate 3 is about creating more structure and innovation out of the chaos. So if you've experienced a lot of chaos in the previous years, this new moon could be an excellent opportunity in addition to the new cycles taking place here in Aries. This new moon could be an excellent opportunity to start creating new structures, especially with Saturn, and innovative solutions to move away from what's transpired in the previous years that just no longer feels good, that maybe feels more chaotic, that doesn't support your work, that doesn't support your health, that doesn't support your joy, and most certainly doesn't support sort of your long-term transformational goals or financial goals. So again, this new moons, new opportunity, new beginnings, generally speaking in astrology, but with it being gate 3 with Chiron, I think it's not only an opportunity for innovative solutions and new paths, but I also think that with Chiron, it could bring up the fear of getting it wrong, looking messy, or struggling with the experimentation process of, what's transpiring, sort of how to get it right, what's going to work, and to just kind of grant yourselves time and space and grace to kind of adjust to the newness of what's happening. Again, some of you, I think this, even though this new moon is happening in the 8th house, the new cycles that are happening at the same time with this new moon in the 8th are connecting sort of your communication, your joy, your health, and your work around this time. So, you know, some of you might be navigating like experimenting new ways of, you know, experimenting with your health or your work or your communication that might feel new, that might feel a little messy for you as you kind of figure out what works and what doesn't. But just a reminder that, you know, these cycles, you know, some of these cycles that are happening around this time are 2.5 years long. The new moon cycle can sometimes be 5-6 months. So to just kind of, a lot's happening, and it's in Aries, it's in a fire, a lot's happening in fire and air this year. So I think we might feel the stimulation of like wanting to make it happen and wanting to go and wanting to move past it or whatever it may be, but also reminding ourselves that, you know, we need to pump the brakes sometimes, and it's okay to kind of figure out and take time of what works and to not be afraid of it looking messy if that's something that resonates around this time. Now, moving on to July. July, the days leading up to July 18th, I honestly think that a lot of us are going to feel this in June going into July. But the reason why I mentioned July 18th is because that's when the Uranus-Pluto trine goes exact. So we've been feeling this kind of the Uranus-Pluto trine going on for some time. And to be honest, we're going to feel that innovation, that transformation, that empowerment, the rapid acceleration of those themes for you regarding career or what brings you fulfillment, as well as your health. But on July 18th, this is when that trine goes exact. And so July could be a little bit more potent with those energies. But we are going to feel it on and off throughout most of the year. But all in all, just to touch on the Uranus in your Gemini 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. Trine Pluto in your 6th house of daily work and or health routines. You know, this could create a lot of innovation and change to your work, your business, what brings you fulfillment, and it creating flow to transform your health, the ability to focus on your health and your vitality, or the work that you want to do, or your routines, or focusing on sort of seeing what transpires with empowering and transforming your health and your routines, and how that creates a lot of flow or the dissolution of obstacles of being able to innovate and change what feels more fulfilling to you, your career, your business, or public recognition, generally speaking. However, really the days leading up to July 19th, I want to point out this Jupiter-Pluto opposition. So Jupiter at 4 degrees of Leo in your 12th house of the subconscious, dreams, behind the scenes work, hidden enemies. So Jupiter had just recently entered this less visible area of your chart. I like to think the 12th house feels private to me. So what's going on mentally, what's going on behind the scenes, what's going on with sleep, solitude, dreams, and its opposition to Pluto is something I've gotten a lot of questions over. So I want to address it because I think there's a lot of fear going on with this. Jupiter-Pluto oppositions can absolutely cause power struggles. Really, any opposition can create struggle because oppositions can sometimes feel like we need to be in two different places at once. And it can feel really difficult to balance and work with because there might be a part of you with Pluto that really wants to focus on empowering and transforming your vitality, your health, your work, and your routines. But then you might feel that it's hard to focus on really expanding your mind and what time alone and rest and solitude. So the 6th and 12th house can create a lot of tug of wars between, mental and physical health, in my opinion. It's just what I've seen over the years. And it can also, from my personal experience, create this. I'm actually going through an opposition in this area right now as I'm recording it with my natal chart. And I feel this 6th house work energy of I want to work, and go. But then, this opposition that's forming in my natal chart with the 12th, it's hard for me to sleep. It's hard for me to focus on sleep. It's hard for me to kind of decompress at the end of the night. So oppositions can be really hard because it's easier said than done. It honestly is easier said than done. And sometimes I personally get a little aggravated with certain translations of it, because it's easier said than done. There's this part of you that like really wants to empower your health and your work and your routines, and then there's also this part of you that's like, man, I kind of just like maybe want alone time, or I want to expand my sleep schedule, or I want to focus on like the inner workings of my mind, or I want to kind of work on things behind the scenes. So some of you might be going through a temporary period of like, I want to rest and just like recharge my batteries and expand in that way. But Pluto going through the 6th is like, we need to empower your work. We need you to work. We need to focus on your routines. We need you to focus on your health and your vitality. So you could temporarily in July feel this tug of war. However, again, I want to give practical solutions to working with this opposition because there are supporting planetary elements going on in the background that can help balance this opposition. And those would be Uranus at 4 degrees in your Gemini 10th house of career, business, public recognition, and Neptune in your Aries 8th house of transformational work and long-term financial themes, investments, assets, debt, loans, partners, resources. So, Uranus at 4 degrees in your Gemini 10th house. I've already talked about the trine to Pluto, where maybe there's innovation to the way you do work, innovation to your career, your public recognition, what brings you fulfillment. And that allows you to dissolve obstacles to be able to focus or transform sort of a health situation, the work you want to do, the routines that really support you and your lifestyle. But Uranus in this Gemini 10th house of career, or what brings you fulfillment, is also sextile Jupiter in that 12th house. So perhaps looking at ways to sort of change or innovate the way you work, what you find fulfilling, can simultaneously create opportunity for more solitude, more alone time, more rest, more sleep, expanding sort of more intimate time alone to focus on your mental thought patterns, focus on sort of your rest, your sleep, sort of, be in your own space and have some solitude. The other thing I want to point out is Neptune at 4 degrees in this Aries 8th house of transformation and or resources is trine this Jupiter in your 12th house. So Jupiter Neptune trines can be really mystical. I think it can be really expansive and creative. And it's in your 8th and your 12th. So they're both happening in averse houses. So this might be private. This might be behind the scenes for a lot of you. But I think, Neptune in this Aries 8th house could be a time where you're starting to kind of shift your ideals around transformational work or shift your ideals around your financial future, and how that can sort of create more alone time, more time for you, more time for rest, more time to focus on sort of expanding your mind, or, maybe Neptune in the eighth house of transformational work, sort of shifting your ideal around your transformational work, sort of tapping into new dimensions and new ways of moving through it, can dissolve the obstacles to being able to expand your subconscious mind, expand your overall vision and ability to see ideas or insights or breakthroughs, especially with Uranus in the mix. And then Neptune in your Aries 8th house is sextile Pluto in the 6th. So again, kind of shifting your ideals, not only around transformational work, but those long-term financial goals, could create opportunities to sort of maybe invest in your health and the work that you want to do. So I think in some weird way, this could be an interesting time where some of you start to shift your perspectives around your career, your public recognition, sort of what is the ideal financial future, and how can that create a situation to support your health, support the work you want to do, but also support the time you need to recharge your batteries, focus on expanding your mind, and potentially even, with Jupiter ruling the 7th house of personal and professional partnerships and it going through the 12th house, this could be a time where some of you might be wanting to be more, create more intimacy, kind of like behind closed doors. So having those personal and professional connections that feel more like the world away from the world, if that makes sense. So that could be another potential with this, and wanting to do that and having to balance it with work and health and routines. But again, I would focus on, if you feel this tug of war around this time, I would focus on the Uranus-Neptune aspects, positive aspects that can create opportunity from, shifting your ideals or really getting clear on that ideal financial future and what sort of needs to dissolve or surrender in order to move towards that. Or shifting your ideals around any transformational work that some of you might be focusing on that can create opportunities for more health and more vitality. So some of you might actually be exploring sort of like your subconscious thought patterns and how that impacts your physical health, right? How your mental health affects your physical health. So there's so many beautiful opportunities for this, I think, for Virgo risings that could be really happening behind the scenes. But I think this could be a really good time to create like more intimacy with the people that really support your health and your vitality and sort of where you want to go moving forward. Then let's get to August. August 28th is the next major point I want to talk about in 2026, because actually, I'm going to back up because there's one thing I want to point out before I get to this, and that is July 19th. So one thing I want to point out before I get to August 28th, that eclipse on August 28th, is we have on July 19th, so going back to July for just a minute, we have Jupiter at 4 degrees of Leo. We have Uranus at 4 degrees of Gemini. We have Neptune at 4 degrees of Aries and Pluto at 4 degrees of Aquarius. So there's a lot of 4 degrees. So if you have any natal placements at 4 degrees, July could be a time where those personal and natal placements at anywhere from 3 to 5 degrees, I would say, could really amplify this energy. Provide more midpoints to sort of merge energies, could provide additional, aspects that could definitely play a part in what transpires around this time. So, definitely pay attention to, something going on with 4 degrees. And then when we get to August 28th, where we have this full moon eclipse in Pisces, lo and behold, at 4 degrees. So I don't know what's going on with 4 degrees over the summer, but we should probably pay attention to it. So August 28th, this full moon lunar eclipse in your Pisces 7th house of personal and professional partnerships, including marriage. Something could be illuminated, culminating, coming to a close regarding something with connections with others, whether you're single or in a relationship. This full moon lunar eclipse really highlighting the area of your connections with others, the connections that you desire, will square Uranus in your Gemini 10th house of career, public recognition, what brings you fulfillment. So again, if you're listening and not watching, we have the sun and the moon, the sun at 4 degrees of Virgo, the moon at 4 degrees of Pisces, again, full moon, sun and moon in opposition, across your first house of the self and the 7th house of the other. So this full moon eclipse is really activating the angular houses. So huge for Virgo risings. I think this could be a huge opportunity for major changes to career, public recognition, what brings you fulfillment. That could be playing a part with what really serves you versus others, what's really being highlighted with your connections with others or the connections and partnerships you really seek. And Uranus forming this T-square with this full moon eclipse across your 1st and 7th house axis. So the T-square puts a lot of pressure on Uranus to act. And Uranus in Gemini is already pretty active, if you ask me. So there's a lot of opportunity for change, the desire for freedom. Some of you might feel the desire to kind of shift your career, shift what brings you fulfillment. Some of you might be really seeking more freedom from something. So it's not necessarily freedom from just, the work you do or something, with a partnership. You could be seeking freedom from something that's felt, that's been playing out for some time. Some of you might take sudden action around this time with what is really illuminating you versus your personal and professional partnerships, and maybe the innovation and change some of you might be really looking for in your career, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So again, the T-square with Uranus, lots of potential for change. The other thing I want to mention is Mercury. Your ruling planet rules your 1st house, will be home and also exalted in your 1st house, is involved in this eclipse. It's right on top of this eclipse happening across your 1st and your 7th house axis. So Mercury is combust. It's burned up by the sun rays here, but it's exalted. So I don't think it's a black and white situation. And it's also square Uranus, which is in a Mercury ruled area, your 10th house of career, business, public recognition, or what brings you fulfillment. So there's another square going on with Mercury. And I think for Virgo risings, there is the potential for you to feel this personally. With transits, it's sort of like where a lot of times we're either watching it or experiencing it. And I think a lot of Virgo risings might be experiencing it where your ruling planet will be home in your 1st house of the self, the physical body, how you take independent action. And it will also be square Uranus in your 10th house of career, business, public recognition. So I think there could be some some change going on that creates tangible results to your physical body, how you want to move through the world, and also your career, what brings you more fulfillment. I also want to point out too that Mars in your Cancer 11th house of friends, groups, communities, and long-term goals will be forming the opening square to Saturn in your Aries 8th house. So Mars, remember, was conjunct, forming a new cycle, playing out over the next 2.5 years back in April of 2026. So this is now the opening square where a lot of times something happens or there's an opportunity to take action regarding what's playing out with that story. So there's additional squares going on with your long-term goals, impacting your social network maybe, as well as sort of the new ways or the new paths that maybe feel like uncharted territory for some of you regarding your approach to your long-term financial goals, kind of looking at new ways, maybe looking at sort of investments, assets, or transformational work that you've never looked at before, that you could be taking action on that's somehow kind of supporting your long-term goals or your social network. But again, Mars is in fall. So Mars and Saturn are in fall in this opening square. So both of these planets are sort of in a foreign country and don't speak the language. So the action could feel a little weird. It could feel like it's completely new. And I think that's something that I'm noticing in 2026. I think a lot of us are going to be navigating either internal or external ways of doing things that feel very new, feels like uncharted territory. And then the last thing I want to mention about this full moon eclipse is that this full moon eclipse in your 7th house of personal and professional partnerships is ruled by Jupiter. And Jupiter will be forming a trine to Saturn in your 8th house. So whatever's culminating, I think there could be some constructive expansion going on in the background. But I think for Virgo risings, because the constructive expansion is happening in the 8th and the 12th, could be more private. It could be more behind the scenes. So whatever is sort of culminating around this time and creating action and change in the more visible areas of your chart and thus life, that could have a direct impact to you with your ruling planet Mercury in your 1st house of the self. The constructive element that you're building or working on and expanding could be really happening behind the scenes, and could involve behind the scenes with transformational work, or it could be happening behind the scenes regarding financial situations, resources, transformational work that somehow could be playing a part in your partnerships or your work and or health with what Jupiter and Saturn rule. Now, getting to the last bit of 2026, I want to jump to November. So, one bit of perspective that I want to talk about in November is close enough. Okay, around November 14th. But again, the days leading up to November 14th, we have Mars and Jupiter at 25 degrees going over the South Node, going into November. So this, with the South Node, this could be bringing you back to something, or this could be releasing something that no longer serves you. And because it's happening in the 12th, this could be happening mentally, privately, behind the scenes, or with your absolute closest, intimate loved ones. 12th house is not, to me, it's a very private place, but it could also be the place where you're your own worst enemy. The 12th house is hidden enemies, but I think the 12th house, from working with so many people over so many years, to me, I've noticed a lot of psychological stuff come up, or things we experience that we don't really want visible to the world. And so, again, with Mars and Jupiter going over the South Node around this time, going into November, you could be coming back to something or releasing something that you're experiencing behind the scenes, behind closed doors. Now, Mars rules your Scorpio 3rd house of communication. Mars also rules this 8th house of resources, long-term finances, or transformational work. So you could be coming back to communicating something, coming back to transformational work, could be coming back to maybe some financial stuff that you initiated earlier in the year. Or you could be releasing some of those themes that no longer serve you and your mental thought patterns or what's going on behind the scenes. Jupiter rules your Sagittarius 4th house of home, family, property, and real estate. So some of you might be coming back to like a home, family, property, real estate situation. Jupiter also rules your Pisces 7th house of personal and professional partnerships. So some of you could be coming back to or releasing something that no longer serves your marriage, your partnership, your connection with others, or coming back to something that happened within your personal or professional partnerships. So the other major perspective I want to point out about this is that both Mercury and Venus recently, at this point, mid-November, both recently went retrograde in Scorpio, a Mars-ruled sign. So, both Venus and Mercury went retrograde, a review and revise period, in a Mars-ruled sign. Then they station direct, and shortly after that, Mars goes over the South Node to release or come back to, after there was 2 retrogrades going over this Mars-ruled area of your chart. So going into September, even maybe October, definitely October, there could be this really strong revisionary period or perfecting period that leads up to you maybe coming back to or releasing something behind the scenes that has played out over the past couple months, where Jupiter's there to, I think, sort of expand perspective behind the scenes, or try to create the opportunity for abundance or expansion, especially as we get into 2027, when Jupiter finally enters your 1st house of self. So the human design, so when the South Node, Mars, and Jupiter are all at 25 degrees in your Leo 12th house, the human design, we look at what gates. South Node at 29, Mars at 29, Jupiter at 29. So we're looking at gate 29, and gate 29 is a lot of things, but to sum it up, it's really about committing to a process. And there's some nuances to that, but there could be something playing out behind the scenes where something could be playing out with a plan of action, core motivation, or desire with Mars where some of you might be gearing up to eventually commit to a process regarding personal and professional partnerships, regarding transformational work, long-term financial themes, as well as any home, family, property, real estate situation that you might be thinking about behind the scenes as well, with just what these planets rule. What I want to point out though about committing to this process and like the themes that might be coming up regarding committing to a particular process with those themes is that both Mars and Jupiter are going to retrograde back to this 25-degree mark. So the story's not over. So whatever is really transpiring this fall, especially pertaining to home, family, property, real estate, partnership themes, long-term finances, transformational work, you could be coming back to it. You could be reviewing and revising to really perfect and commit to the plan of action that is truly in alignment. Again, I think it's really going to initiate behind the scenes and then become visible to you as you get into 2027. And so Jupiter will retrograde back to this 25-degree mark starting January 8th. 2027, and Mars will retrograde back to this 25-degree territory starting March 4th, 2027. So again, got some time to work with it. But I think the biggest thing about whatever Virgo risings are thinking about regarding those themes that I mentioned and how they might be playing into the process or committing to a process that you might be initially thinking about behind the scenes. Be aware of, especially with gate 29 involved with the human design, being aware of what you're saying yes to or what you're committing to, and if it's really in alignment with your inner authority. And I think the beauty of this happening at gate 29 and the fact that both of these planets coincidentally are going to retrograde back to this 25-degree mark and thus gate 29 again, it's sort of giving us a really wonderful opportunity to really review and revise to what is in full alignment to the process or committing to the process or the journey that you feel really motivated towards in 2027, particularly around partnership, home, family, and long-term financial themes, as well as any transformational work that can help support and expand those core motivations and desires regarding those themes.